In India, near the border of the country's capital, groups of farmers are in protest. They have a list of demands, and on top is the minimum support price for all the crops. There were sadly ugly scenes that were reported last week of stone pelting and violence by some of the protesters and tear gas shelling and force used by the police and paramilitary. Chaos ensued on the streets, leading to injuries on both the sides, protesters and of cops. Now, focus became the hysteria and the tensions in and around India. If you search online about the protests, specifically of the farmers, India protest news emerges immediately. First, farm protests are at one corner close to the national capital, not across the whole country. Second, there are also simultaneously discussions are on with the government representatives, and that is by the senior union government ministers. 4 rounds of talks have already happened in 1 week. Third, let's look at the scenario and compare globally about such street protests and how they are dealt with. Now, here in India, we are looking at farm protests 2.0, which means the second round of protests. The first round was from 2020 to 2021, when talks also failed back then between the farmers and the government. And on 26 January 2021, which is India's Republic Day, hundreds of these protesters barged on the streets, even storming the historic Red Fort in Delhi, leading to violence and arson. How are then such protests dealt across the world, especially in Western nations, which are the benchmark of democracy? Across Europe, as we speak, specifically farmers are organizing protests. In France, on January 31, cops detained dozens of protesting farmers, demanding improved pay and protection from foreign competition in Paris. Eventually, the French government had to step in with a peace offering worth 400 million euros. After that, the roadblocks started to ease out. Tension persisted in Germany after farmers came out fighting against a subsidy cut, which is a phase out of a tax break, and that was on agricultural diesel. Since the 8th of January, Germany's streets have witnessed tensions that continue to prevail. In Poland, a group of protesters tried to force their way into a local authority building, but the police used pepper spray to stop them. European Union environmental regulations in other nations too, where farmers are pushing back against policies they believe could hurt their livelihood. So protests and the government stopping them to proceed further are being reported from Spain, Italy, Poland, France, and also Greece. While India's protests are regularly highlighted, let me tell you that in 2023, 83 countries, from China to North Macedonia, were all boiling over with angry protesters. According to Carnegie's Global Protest Tracker, 7 countries, Denmark, Mozambique, Norway, Ireland, even Sweden, where not a lot of protests take place, joined this protest club. And not just farmers' protest, but look like the entire Europe last year, and in fact until recently, is getting engulfed in tensions without a war. Police officers arrested protesters during an Extinction Rebellion demonstration in Tower Hill in London in August 2023. 7 activists protesting against climate change climbed into the Trevi fountain in Rome and poured diluted charcoal into the water to turn it black. Police swooped in and arrested them. In France, cars and public buildings were set on fire. Clashes were reported between police and protesters after an Algerian descent teenager was shot dead by the cops. After this, when pro-Palestine protests turned violent, massive crackdown was made against the miscreants who were also damaging public property. In the United Kingdom, even in the United States of America, reports have surfaced of defacing statues, paintings, historic landmarks in the name of freedom of expression. And then the crackdown by the government specifically on those individuals who were indulging in violence. Western nations have largely allowed mass protests and freedom of speech. But you've also now recently seen cops and government starting to arrest and push back on protests which are resorting to violence, arson, and illegal means. Will you call this fascism or ensuring that the country does not fall into anarchy? From the rich Western nations, let me now take you to one of the poorest countries in the world in Africa, for example, Chad, where scores of protesters were shot dead, wounded, who were agitating against the October crackdown. I'm not even mentioning the Middle East or the West Asia because one is hardly allowed to even organize a mass protest of dissent in most of these countries on that side. Yet, the most visible crackdown that has happened has been in Iran, where the historic protest movement since 2022, following the death of Mahsa Amini in police custody and popularizing the slogan, "Women, Life, Freedom." Dozens of young men and women have not just been detained, but many have been executed in secrecy, even in public, on one flimsy charge or another. One country that comes to immediate attention for me is Canada. Remember how its leaders, especially Jagmeet Singh, went on and on about the first farmer protest in 2021. The leader was in alliance with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's party. Now, this Neta from Canada said, and I quote him here, "I'm deeply concerned about the violence against farmers in India." This was on 30th January, 4 days after the miscreants went on a rampage even at the Red Fort. No word on the violence by some of the illegal elements there in those protests. Violence that was perpetrated on the cops who were beaten black and blue. There were historic Indian landmarks that were defaced. But simply a statement to claim that farmers are being violated by and in India. Anyway, that's not the point, because a leader must stand for the right to peaceful protest, and protesting citizens must get support. That's the whole point of democracy. But exactly a year later, in 2022, when protests started in his country, the government deployed an immediate violent crackdown. Remember the trucker convoy protest, when thousands of truckers emerged in large numbers against the Canadian government's vaccine mandates, which also were about border movement restrictions? That brought the country to a temporary standstill. Border exchange of goods suffered immensely. Now let's draw a comparison here. India is an agrarian economy. More than 50% of the country is directly engaged in agriculture, and our economy depends heavily on agriculture. Hence, the farmers are extremely important for us. The Canadian truck industry, similarly, is very important for Canada's own economy. These are not a random group whose agitation will make no difference on the ground. The industry generated $40 billion in just 2021. It's a major contributor to Canadian economy, and with at least 50,000 business and 40,000 employees. This is an estimate. While India did discussion after discussion, even in 2024, as we speak, discussions and deliberations are on. Indians largely have come out in support of the farmers. Guess how the Canadian government responded to the trucker protests? The government imposed the National Emergencies Act. Truckers' personal and corporate bank accounts could be frozen, their trucks would be hauled away. Immediate, brutal decisions, no wasting time. Court trials have started against some of these leaders of the convoy protest. And what did the Canadian Democratic Liberal leader Jagmeet Singh say on that? He denounced the convoy protests and called it false information being spread through inflammatory, divisive and hateful comments, and called them even extremists. Can you believe this? Let's now talk about India. Fourth round of talks have been done. Proposals and assurances have been exchanged. Talks are inconclusive for now. Farmer groups are not convinced with the offer and have said that they will mobilize further. More talks are expected soon. I hope that there will be more discussions on the table rather than in the police control room or the political corridors. City borders are calm for now, though security will be tightened. As I conclude, unlike other nations, for India, farmers are not just employees. India's motto is Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan. Respect for the soldier, respect for the farmer. So we hope that there will be more talks and less force. And for that, miscreants, violent arsonists must not be allowed to hijack any movement. Sensible, rational discussions must be brought on the table for the farmers, for the nation, not for political or ideological benefits. Thank you for watching.